Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to episode 4 of IT Synergy's Hacking the Human Security series. Today we're going to be talking about working remotely. So let's jump right in and get started. So just real quick background on IT Synergy, talk a little bit about our why we do, what gets us out of bed every day and motivates us to come into the office. We call it creating positive experiences with technology. And so if you think about a time when maybe you got a new phone or saw a new gadget for the first time, and you sat and started playing with it, and you had that moment where you said, wow, this is really cool. That feeling is what motivates us to do what we do. That moment where you say, wow, this is awesome, and have an appreciation for technology. That's what gets us out of bed, is creating that feeling. So let's jump right in and talk about why are we here? Why do we put on this free webinar series on the second Thursday of every month called Hacking the Human? Well, in 2014, IBM did a study, and that study showed that 95% of all security incidents involve human error. CompTIA followed up with a study in 2015 where they found that human error accounts for 52% of the root cause of security breaches. And also last year, Experian did a study that said employees in negligence are the leading cause of security incidents but remain the least reported issue. And so the evidence is overwhelming that when it comes to the security of a technology environment, that human beings and human error are clearly a leading cause of a lot of the problems that we see. So our goal in the next 14 minutes here is to give you some quick action items to help you be security smart and not be the cause of one of these incidents. And I would encourage you to join us on the second Thursday of every month at 11:30 Arizona time for a new 15-minute topic. We'll have a little bit more about that later on. But if you like what you see today or have seen in the past, please feel free to share it with anyone you would like and invite them to join as well. So let's get going. Today's topic is working remotely. Let's jump right in. What's the problem? Why are we talking about working remotely? Well, according to Leslie Lamb, who's the Director of Global Risk Management for Cisco, potential loss of data is a top concern to consider when developing a remote work policy. There was a survey done by Symantec earlier this year regarding the use of public internet, so public Wi-Fi, coffee shops, airports, etc. And that study found that more than 60% of people who use public Wi-Fi feel that their information is safe while they're using public Wi-Fi. And the part that's particularly concerning to me is that only 50% of them feel that it is their responsibility to secure their information when using public Wi-Fi. Of the other 50%, 17% think that it's the website's responsibility, and 17% think that it's the Wi-Fi company's responsibility. Unfortunately, I've got some bad news for that 34% of people that think it's somebody else's problem. There was also a study done in 2014 by Imation, who makes a product called IronKey, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, that found that 25% of employees admitted to breaking security policy to work remotely. And 40% that either said that either they or someone they knew had either lost a device or had a device stolen in public, and 75% of those lost or stolen devices had unencrypted work-related data on them at the time that they were either lost or stolen. Finally, there's a little bit of a generational element to this, in that a lot of these studies found that the younger you are, the more likely you are to engage in risky behavior on public Wi-Fi. So the younger you are, the earlier your generation, the more likely you are to have grown up in an environment where internet is readily available everywhere, regardless of where they are, and the less you think about the security concerns with utilizing some of those public resources. So you say, okay, I get it. I understand the problem. I'm in. What can I do about it? Well, let's start out talking a little bit about Wi-Fi. So we all probably have used at one point or another the free public Wi-Fi. So you turn on your computer, you look for wireless networks, you see the old free public Wi-Fi network out there, and you think, great, that's my path to the internet. Well, let's talk a little bit about that free public Wi-Fi. So there's a couple of things that you need to think about with that free public Wi-Fi, is that when you're using any kind of free internet access out in the public, that you don't know who else is on that line with you. And so bad guys can effectively launch what's called, in technical terms, a man-in-the-middle attack. And so what they will do is they will put out these signals that say free public Wi-Fi, like the one that we've got pictured here, But what you're actually connecting to is the bad guy, and then the bad guy is connecting on the back end out to the public Wi-Fi or the public internet. So from your perspective, you don't see that you're not connected to the internet because you're being routed through the bad guy first and then out to the internet. So you're still able to get to the internet, but the problem is now the bad guy is sitting in between you and the internet. And so that gives the bad guy effectively, kind of like tapping a phone line, the ability to listen in on your conversation. And so I would encourage you to think of free public Wi-Fi. Think back to your childhood when we used to talk about stranger danger, offering you a piece of candy or something like that. You really ought to think about public Wi-Fi in kind of the same way, and be suspicious and don't just readily accept that a free Wi-Fi environment is a safe environment for computing. Some other things to think about when it comes to public Wi-Fi is that if you do not have a firewall on your computer, and you connect to public Wi-Fi, you have effectively just enabled a playground for a bad guy. So without a firewall enabled, you're essentially opening your computer to all kinds of things that bad guys can do. So they can transfer files to you if you have file sharing enabled, and those files can then be used to launch malware, viruses, all types of other attacks. They can also access the data on your computer. They can get access to other services on your computer. So not having a firewall is not a good idea when you're on public Wi-Fi. And I'd also note that in every version of Windows since XP, the Windows firewall has been enabled by default, but on Mac, the firewall is not enabled by default. Now, the Mac people say, or Apple says, that the reason for that is because Apple doesn't have as many services that are turned on as a Windows machine does. Nonetheless, I still think it would be a good idea to enable the firewall on your Mac, which you can do in the preferences screen under the security, and go in and find the firewall and go ahead and turn the firewall on for your Mac. So if we do have a legitimate Wi-Fi connection, so we've avoided this man-in-the-middle attack, how can we be sure that the hardware isn't compromised? And so what I mean by that is another method of attack for the bad guys is they will sometimes log into the device that is providing the Wi-Fi itself, so the hotspot device itself, and they can do a couple of things. They can either insert some bad software on that device, or they could possibly insert some fake screens that pop up when you log into that device. And so the issue is with some vendors, of course, they're going to have their Wi-Fi secured, but with some of the smaller vendors, they may still have the default password on some of these devices or that type of thing that make it very easy for bad guys to get into it and then alter what happens when people connect to that particular hotspot. And so you can't always be sure that even if everything looks good, that the hardware hasn't been compromised. And then one other thing to note is that there are still some hotels out there that, in addition to using Wi-Fi, also offer you a wired connection in the room. And it's important that you're just aware that connecting your computer to a wired connection in a hotel or in a public place still exposes you to all of the risks that we're talking about here. So I don't want you to think that this is only about Wi-Fi. If there is a scenario where you're using a wired network in a public place, all the things that we're talking about still apply here. Okay, so what can you do about it? So how can you be safe when you're out there connecting to public Wi-Fi? Well, the first thing is, when possible, try to only use legitimate, well-known Wi-Fi access. So it's pretty likely that an organization like a Starbucks or a Marriott is much more likely to take security seriously, not use default passwords on their wireless access points and that type of thing, than, say, a single location mom and pop Joe's Coffee Shack type of place. Most likely what you're going to find in Joe's Coffee Shack is they went down to Best Buy, they bought themselves an access point, maybe they changed the default password, maybe they didn't, and there you go, you're on the internet. And so there's a much greater risk in that scenario than there is with the larger, more established players. So if you do connect to Wi-Fi and you are going to surf the web, it's important to make sure that your connection is encrypted, especially if you're doing something sensitive. And it's very easy to tell this. You just need to look up in your address bar for the HTTPS. The S on the end implies that it is secure, and therefore the encryption between your computer and the web server is encrypted, making it harder for the bad guys to listen in. If you are on public Wi-Fi and you're going to do anything business related, it's a very good idea to use VPN. So from some of the studies I was talking about earlier, they found that only 18% of consumers use VPN when they're on public Wi-Fi, and 30% say they don't even know what VPN is. And so VPN is one of the, and VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and that's one of the most secure ways that you can operate in a public Wi-Fi type environment. Also important to turn on your firewall and turn off sharing. Most of the modern versions of Windows, when you first connect to a new Wi-Fi network, will pop up a box and ask you if you want to enable sharing. If you're on a public Wi-Fi connection, the answer should always be no, and your firewall should be turned on like we talked about earlier. It's also a good idea to keep the Wi-Fi turned off, and so this applies not only to laptops and computers, but also applies to your mobile devices, iPads, mobile phones, etc. And you get the side benefit of it saves your battery too. It'll give you longer battery life by keeping your Wi-Fi off when you're not using it. That keeps the mobile device from connecting to networks automatically, which a lot of them will do. And again, some of those networks may not be as safe as others. Next, make sure that if you're doing something particularly sensitive, like maybe some type of financial activity, banking, etc., if you have a personal hotspot, either a separate hotspot device from a cellular company, or possibly if your phone has that capability to be a hotspot, use that for the most sensitive activities, and don't use the public Wi-Fi at all. It's also important that you configure your device to use a strong password. By default, a lot of mobile phones come with the public Wi-Fi password, maybe only 6 characters. Go ahead and change that from the default, make it longer, make it more secure. You only have to enter it on your computer once, so not a lot of problem to get that configured. Next up is to be aware of your environment when you're working remotely, especially if you're in a public space. So one of the best ways to steal data from remote employees is actually a very low-tech method, and it's called shoulder surfing in the industry. So here's a picture of what we're talking about. So you can see this guy sitting in an airport kind of looking over his shoulder. Well, at that point, he can see not only whatever's happening on that screen. So if this person working remotely is accessing some confidential company information, possibly some confidential emails, but he can also see the keyboard. And so as this person types in passwords, PIN numbers, other things like that, that can all be seen. And so you need to be aware of what's in your environment. I have some good news for you today. We don't often sell on these webinars, but I am prepared today for the world premiere of a new product that we're offering. We have a working prototype developed that solves the shoulder surfing problem, and I will share that with you now. Here it is. As you can see, this is an extremely secure environment. We don't have our website up yet, but we do have a working prototype, so I will follow up with more information as soon as that goes on sale. But on a slightly more serious note, you can use screen protectors on both laptops and mobile devices that allow only the person who's using that device to see the information on the screen. I have a link here. 3M is one of my favorite companies that makes screen protectors for a variety of different devices. And there are, by the way, a couple of links in today's presentation, so if you don't get the chance to take them down, no worries. My email address will be at the end, and you can email me, and I'll be happy to share these links with you. You can also use a software called KeePass, which is a free software that's available online, or some other password solution that saves you from typing. So one of the things that KeePass does is allows you to store your passwords securely in a database, and then what you can do is you can take those passwords and put them on your clipboard temporarily for 30 seconds. And so rather than having to type a password, you just put it on your clipboard temporarily and then paste it into the password field, and then that will prevent you from typing the password. So if someone's looking over your shoulder, they're not going to see you type in the password. Be careful on Apple devices. iPhones and iPads, when you're typing a password, will show you the character for a second or two before it turns it into a little dot. And so that means somebody looking over your shoulder can see your password even if they don't happen to catch which key you hit. And then finally, don't forget video cameras. One of the things that we forget when we're working in public spaces is that video cameras are everywhere. Whether that's a video camera that's there in a shop for security purposes, or maybe somebody is even just sitting there with a small like GoPro or something like that that's recording video. The thing about video is that if somebody can catch you working on your computer and get it on video, they can slow it down and watch it over and over and over and see you type in all of your critical information. So next up, let's talk about plugging in. Let's talk about both what you plug into and what you allow to be plugged into you. So how many of us have been to a conference at one point or another where they're handing out free USB sticks with some information at some of the booths? Or have you ever been in a scenario where maybe you found a USB stick in a parking lot and you want to get it back to the owner? Well, the natural tendency in both of these scenarios is to plug that USB stick into your computer to see what's on it, or to possibly find out who it belongs to so that you can return it to them. The problem with that is plugging in a USB stick exposes your computer to whatever might be on that USB stick. So a bad guy could put some malicious software on there that would allow them to take control of your computer, that would allow you to log keystrokes on your computer, all kinds of nasty stuff. So when you're picking up a USB stick from a trade show or possibly finding one on the street or on the sidewalk, don't plug that into your computer when you're out and about remotely, or don't plug it into your computer at all. Next up, if you're out and you're looking to get charged up, your device is running low on power. We've got a couple of examples here of charging stations. We see these all over the place in airports and all this sort of thing. The problem with this is plugging your device into that USB port, you don't know what's on the other side of that USB port. And when you plug your device into a USB port, it will deliver you power, but it may also create a data connection, therefore allowing whatever you have just connected to connect to the data on your phone and capture data on your phone. There are even certain models of phone that when you plug into the port on the bottom of the phone, it will allow you to see what is on the screen of the phone and even potentially record that information. So as you access banking sites, type in passwords, etc., all of that information can now be recorded on a video and watched later by the bad guys. So the solution here is relatively straightforward and relatively easy. It's just go old school. Carry a plug with you, plug into your own plug that goes directly into a wall outlet, and then put your phone into the USB port on that plug. So we'll finish up here with some VPN do's and don'ts. VPN is a great tool to give you a secure environment from outside the office, so I would definitely encourage the use of VPN. There's just some things for you to be aware of when using VPN. Number one, when you are working, when you are doing things and working remotely, stay connected to the VPN. You need to make sure, though, that when you are not working, you disconnect from the VPN. We had a scenario with a customer a couple of years ago where someone logged in, was working remotely on a Sunday morning, forgot to disconnect from the VPN. Later that night, that person's, somebody else who lived with him came and sat down at the computer and decided to go to an illegal file sharing site and download a movie that they didn't own the copyright to. At 10:30 on a Sunday night, it took the legal department from the studio to have an attorney on the phone with the company threatening to shut down their internet connection in about 30 minutes. And so you need to make sure that you're only connected to the VPN when you're working remotely. Be aware that when you're connected to VPN, your internet connection might be routed through the company rather than going straight out to the internet. So again, if you're doing legitimate work, that's fine. If you, let's say, have some habits that maybe you don't want your employer to learn about, then you don't want your internet connection routed through the employer because you don't know what they're recording. Also, what if you're connected to VPN and you decide that's a good time to start surfing some of your favorite job sites? That, again, might be something else that you don't necessarily want your employer to be aware of. And then be aware that VPN creates a path into the company's network from the outside for malware, and so it's important that the device that you're connecting from is in good shape. It needs to have antivirus software, it needs to be up to date, it needs to have security settings or security patches installed to keep the company network safe. So finally, where's the data? When we talk about working remotely, you need to be careful about using file sharing services that are free, like Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, etc. Be aware that none of these free services use any type of encryption. And so when you're putting data into these services, that data is living unencrypted and gives people very easy access to it if that account is compromised. They also don't have centralized control. So when I talk about centralized control, I'm talking about the ability of an employee leaves and I want to be able to remove that data from their personal devices. These free services don't have that capability. You also need to be careful about using personal email accounts as a conduit to transfer data. So, hey, I'm going to go home and I'm going to work on this tonight. Let me just email this file to myself. Once I do that, that corporate information has left my control and is now outside of what I can secure and be in control of. So instead, give remote workers the tools to work remotely that is in a secure fashion but is effortless for them. So all of these solutions are paid solutions, so there is not a free solution that's a good way to do this, but there are products like Boxcryptor that runs on top of Dropbox that still allows you to use Dropbox but encrypts all of the information inside of Dropbox. There's other vendors like Anchor and Box that also offer solutions to give you the centralized control and encryption in order to keep data safe. Finally, bring your own device. So consider your policies related to bring your own device. which is BYOD. You need to think about remote wipe. So if you're going to allow people to use their personal cell phones, iPads, etc., to access your data, you may want to have remote wipe capability, but the problem is when we say remote wipe, that means I can wipe out my data remotely if there's corporate data on there, but the problem is what if there's also personal information on there? So there are some personnel and legal issues that you need to think about related to remote wipe. Security software, so what security software are they running? Can you be sure that they're running antivirus? Can you be sure that the antivirus is up to date? What are your policies related to bring your own device? So do you have written policies about what's allowed, what's not allowed? Is access on that remote device restricted to the corporate user? So for example, if you allow people to use their home computer and there's only one login to the home computer, and they have their VPN connection there and their corporate data on there, what's to prevent someone else in the household or someone who's visiting the household from sitting down at that computer and accessing all of your corporate data? And then finally, there are tools available, hygiene tools, that will allow you to check the status of a computer when it connects to your corporate networks to see if it has antivirus, to see if security patches are installed, etc. But these take some back-end infrastructure to run and are complex to configure to begin with. So it takes a little bit of effort to get that going. There is a solution from Microsoft called Windows to Go. I've got a link to it here from IronKey. And so what that does is actually allows you to totally encapsulate a computer inside of a USB key. So if somebody's working from home, they plug in the USB key, they boot from that, they get a full Windows experience, but again, there's a little bit of setup and a little bit of work that has to be done there. And then finally, virtual desktops can also be another path for this. So I have gone a little bit over time. I apologize to everyone. Thank you very much. Our next webinar will be November 10th at 11:30 Arizona time. The registration is now live at itsynergy.com/webinar, so you can go there right now and register for the November 10th webinar. The topic is going to be ransomware, so we're going to talk about how to avoid it and also what to do if you do happen to get it. As I said before, the webinars are the second Thursday of every month at 11:30 a.m. Feel free to pass this along to anyone you think could benefit from these. There is me, there is my email address if you'd like any of the links or have any questions from today's presentation. And as I said, you can also email info@itsynergy.com to get people on the invite list. So thanks very much and have a great Thursday.